Hello, and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study here at St. Paul's Church of the Nazarene. We are glad you could be with us this week. I will be taking over for Pastor Levi for the next few weeks, and we will be continuing in our study of Revelation. Today, we are in Revelation chapter 17. Before we begin, as a reminder, we have been studying Revelation with this eye toward the ending, with an awareness that Revelation is ultimately hopeful, and a recognition that Revelation was not written to create fear, but to encourage the people of God to be faithful in the midst of chaos and persecution, and to open their eyes to reality as it is, and not as those with power have often presented it. With that in mind, hear the word of the Lord from Revelation chapter 17. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly amazed, but the angel said to me, "Why are you so amazed? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to ascend from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will be amazed when they see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Also they are 7 kings, of whom 5 have fallen, 1 is living, and the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, "The waters that you saw where the whore is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the whore. They will make her desolate and naked. They will devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put into their hearts to carry out his purpose by agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So this chapter really focuses on this one image from several different angles. It is the great whore, the woman sitting on the scarlet beast with 7 horns and 7 heads and 10 horns, Babylon the Great, and the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. This whole chapter, all of Revelation 17, is a depiction of what empire is really like, behind its glamour and the claims that it makes. John is attempting here to reveal the character and the nature of empire, specifically in his context, the Roman Empire. This chapter is also an exploration of the great city, the great Babylon, whom God gave the wine cup of fury of God's wrath at the end of Revelation 16. We are continuing with a fuller depiction of what this great city, this great Babylon is, and then in the next chapter, in chapter 18, we will get into what the punishment actually involves. We did a little bit of that here at the end of this chapter, but there's a much greater depiction of the judgment that comes in Revelation 18. So the first depiction we get of empire, specifically the Roman Empire in this chapter, is that of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk. First, it is important to note that the imagery of fornication is common biblical language for idolatry. This is the type of language that the prophets in the Old Testament use over and over again when they're speaking of Israel's unfaithfulness to God and going after idols. They are adulterers. They have this language of fornication and sexual immorality can often carry that type of imagery of idolatry rather than necessarily being specifically about sexual activity. But it also indicates the very seductive nature of this empire. The way that both the powerful, the kings of the earth, and the common people, the inhabitants of the earth, are drawn into its ways. This happens primarily through promises of peace, prosperity, and power. The ways of the empire claim to bring peace and prosperity through power, but those ways are destructive. They are, after all, this beast that we see in this chapter is another, it has already appeared before us in Revelation. It is the beast from Revelation 13. So the ways of empire are the ways of the beast. The one who kills all those who do not worship its image. So although empire can be clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with jewels and pearls and gold and have a golden cup in its hand, that cup is really full of abominations and impurities, and the empire is drunk on the blood of saints and of the witnesses to Jesus. Empire can appear very beautiful and very worthwhile, but the ways of empire are full of evil and come from idolatry. And then we get an angel that interprets for us many of the signs in this vision. First, the angel says that the beast was and is not, and is about to ascend from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. This is actually a parody of something we've already heard in Revelation. God has been described as the one who is, and who was, and who is to come. The beast stands in contrast to this God. And the beast and all who support it will go to destruction, while the eternal God, the source of all life, will come and will set things right. This beast will not last forever. The beast who was and is not and who is to come is the opposite of the God who is and who was and is to come. And then we get an interpretation of the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The 7 heads are given 2 different interpretations, actually. First, they are called the 7 mountains on which the woman sits. This is actually a pretty clear reference to Rome, which is known as the city of 7 hills. The 7 heads are also called 7 kings, in other words, 7 Roman emperors, although which 7 precisely we don't actually know, depending on which ones you count as emperors, where you start, where you end. We don't know for sure who it is. We know that in this group, 5 have fallen, 1 was then living, and 1 had not yet come. But the implication is not that there's only going to be 1 more Roman emperor. The implication is that the time of the Roman Empire is nearing its end, that Rome will not continue to stand forever. This is actually a common method in apocalyptic literature. When you have 7 of something, if you say that 5 have passed and 1 is now and 1 more will come, since 7 indicates fullness of time, if you're at the 6th of the 7, you are almost at the end of the fullness of that thing. So in this case, John is declaring that the Roman Empire is about to come to an end. And then we have an 8th king, which is the beast, and the beast belongs to the 7. There's some discuss that this could be Nero come back from the dead to retake over the Roman Empire and to visit all of the evils that Nero had inflicted the first time upon Christians. That's one of the more widely interpretations of this. Don't really know. But anyway, the message is that this empire, the Roman Empire, will indeed soon come to an end, that the faithful must hold on only a little while longer, and then that God will come and bring judgment. And then we have this image that the 10 horns are 10 more kings. Probably not Roman emperors in this situation, considering that they yield their power and authority to the beast. These are probably leaders of small nation states around the Roman Empire. Quite possibly, it's another reference to the kings of the whole earth from the end of Revelation 16. But they join with the beast and they make war on the Lamb, but the land will conquer them. Like the kings of the whole world from Revelation 16:14, they join with the beast in making war against God and the Lamb, but they are defeated. There's Jesus conquers them in this passage, but there's no real assurance of how. There's no real depiction of how God and the Lamb prove victorious over all these kings who have gathered to battle against them, either here or at the end of Revelation 16. John just gives us two assurances of why the Lamb will prevail. First, he calls the Lamb he calls the Lamb King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The Lamb is over all kings, even the beast and the 10 kings that are the horns of the beast that will submit their power and authority to the beast. Even over them, the Lamb is king. Even over the Roman Empire, the Lamb is king and Lord. Secondly, John declares that those with the Lamb are called and chosen and faithful. If we remember back to the beginning of Revelation 14, we have this image of the 144,000 who stand with the Lamb on Mount Zion in opposition to the beast, and John probably has the same group in mind here. And so John assures the churches that the Lamb whom they follow is indeed more powerful and above all other rulers and authorities, even the Roman Empire, the beast who is destined to destruction. Those who have been called and chosen must simply be faithful. Then we get one last interpretation of John's vision from the angel. We are told that the waters are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. In other words, the Roman Empire, the great whore who sits on many waters, is over most of the known world. The peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages are those nations and peoples around the Roman Empire who are under its rule and authority and who have been forced to submit or have chosen to submit because of the power and the seductive nature of empire. But these peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages are also contrasted with the great multitude from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages back in Revelation 7. They are another image of the vastness of those. Whereas in Revelation 7, we get this image of the vastness of those who belong to God, who are called and chosen and faithful. And here we get this vastness of this image of the vast nature of empire and how it covers the world, and people submit to it and join in it, even because it is because it has this way of seducing us into thinking that its ways are good and right. But then we get this note that these people are not happy with Rome at all. In fact, even though the 10 horns have yielded their power and authority to the eighth, who may did some explanation as to what is going on when the beast is a separate king and not one of the Roman emperors, but the peoples and multitudes and nations and languages work together with the 10 horns who've submitted to the beast and with the beast to overthrow Rome. If this is indeed Nero come back from the dead, that John is sort of playing on the fear that this would happen, this was an actual myth of the time. There was this fear that Nero would come back and join in with the kings from the east that we saw back in Revelation 16, the Parthian empires, and sweep through Rome and overthrow the current Roman government and reinstall Nero as this figurehead. So if this is the imagery that John is using, if this beast is supposed to represent the Nero, I mean, though John probably didn't believe Nero would literally come back from the dead, he's probably thinking more of a figure with the same sort of spirit and power of Nero. He sees that all the peoples of that the Roman empires have subjected and forced into submission, and even some of those, and even maybe seduced into submission, will realize that Rome is not what they want, and will decide to join forces with these new powers to overthrow Rome and install themselves as powerful. And then John borrows some very graphic imagery from Ezekiel 23, with the peoples, the 10 horns, and the beast making Rome desolate and naked, devouring her flesh and burning her up with fire. Just very graphic imagery of punishment and of Rome's destruction at the hands of those whom Rome has ruled over for years. But this judgment is not just at the hands of the people, it is in many ways God's judgment. God has promised their kingdom to the beast until God's words will be fulfilled. And this incites them to bring about the destruction of Rome. So in this chapter, we have John revealing the character and the nature of empire, especially the Roman Empire of his day, but also of all empires through all ages. The Roman Empire is outwardly seductive and pleasing. It brings peace and power and prosperity, but it does so at the expense of others. It seduces both the powerful and the common with its promises. But at the same time, it is full of wickedness, idolatry, and bloodshed. It may seem like it is the most powerful nation in the world and that it will stand forever, but its end is near and its fall is assured. And it will go to war against Yod and the Lamb. But the Lamb's victory is assured. Empire cannot triumph over the Lamb. The Lamb is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, so the Lamb is Lord even over the beast and over the great whore who sits on the beast. The Lamb is Lord and King even over the embodiment of empire. And in the end, those whom the empire has subjected to its rule and killed and hurt and maimed, those very people will turn against the empire and bring it to destruction. So then, this is how John calls for the faithfulness of his readers. He calls them to remember that empire is not forever, that empire will one day end, the Roman Empire and all empires. And he reminds them that even though the empire may seem powerful, it will fall. So he warns them, do not participate in its seductive ways. Do not conform to its patterns and promises of power, peace, and prosperity, but live faithfully as the people who are called and chosen by God. This, then, is my prayer for us today, that we may be the faithful people of God, that we may resist the seductive ways of empire and instead live in the ways of God and of the Lamb, that we may not desire and seek the peace, power, and prosperity that come from empire, but that we may seek instead the peace of God. That we will remember that no empire, not the Roman Empire, not modern empires, lasts forever. That all empires will indeed one day fall, and the kingdom of God will be fully realized on earth as it is in heaven. And so we will faithfully follow the God who is, and who was, and who is to come. Go in the grace and the peace of God.